For 20 years, she wore a mask, not the uniform, the rank, or the call sign that made her a legend among maintainers. The other mask, the one that said, "I've got this, I'm fine, everything's under control." Lieutenant Colonel Angela Strike Stevens. She led hundreds of airmen, commanded maintenance squadrons, keeping F-15 Strike Eagles combat ready. She advised the Chief of Staff of the Air Force inside the Pentagon. She was one of only 3 women among 350 maintainers in Afghanistan, survived traumatic physical injuries, then battled through 10 years of infertility. And then she had a baby, the thing she'd fought a decade to achieve, and it almost killed her. Not because of the birth, because of what came after. Severe postpartum depression, crippling anxiety, and something she couldn't name for an entire year. Suicidal ideation. Every minute of every day. Here's the part that should terrify us. She was isolated in high-profile staff jobs at the Pentagon, away from her teams, trapped in spreadsheets and cubicles, and because her default was the mask, the high-performing leader was silently drowning. No one noticed the difference. She didn't let them. In this episode, Strike opens up about why her call sign, Strike, means trust and connection, and why she needed it most. The airman she lost to suicide, and the commander who didn't understand it until she lived it. A year of suicidal thoughts while maintaining high performance in the Pentagon. The personal article that went viral, and the thousands of silent leaders who responded. Why civil servants and leaders are dying at rates we're not even tracking. If you've ever felt like you've had it all together, if you've ever wondered if asking for help makes you weak, if you've been told that leaders don't struggle, this conversation will change how you think about strength.
I went out and I walked the flight line and I didn't see any. And we had 350 people on our team and I was the only leader.
Welcome to Voice for Valor. Ange, welcome to Voice for Valor. I'm so happy to have you here today. Just to know the fact that we have a past, right? From your retirement to me working with your husband in OSD policy, and it's such a pleasure to chat with fellow veterans that are trying to make a difference in the world today. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, Mike, thank you for having me. I think those intersections always happen for a reason, and you and I have had a few chats that prove that that is the case. So I'm grateful to be here.
Awesome. Well, I have to start with this. Call signs. Call signs are a common thing in some of our military culture. I was fortunate enough to avoid the call sign, even though some things were given to me. But my first question for you today is, where does strike and transformation come from? That call sign, and when did you realize your calling was about transformation?
Yeah, so I actually come from a community where call signs are not the norm. So it was a unique point in my journey later in my career where I earned and was given the call sign. I worked in aircraft maintenance for 20 years, as you know, and was in an organizational experiment where they merged the fighter squadron and maintenance, which they've done over the years. And towards the end of that assignment, they sprung a naming ceremony on me, we'll just say, as I was getting ready to leave that unit. And it really symbolized for me the trust and connection over the course of a really difficult assignment, where we overcame a lot and went through a lot together. You know, there's always stories behind a call sign. So we were working with the F-15 Strike Eagle, and I was an old lieutenant colonel at this point, not some young lieutenant coming into a naming. And they said I was the oldest officer, longest tenured officer to have maintained the Strike Eagle. They said they liked that I would strike to attack problems, but they wanted to go on strike from the meetings I would make them have to attack all the problems. So those were the layers they told me. So yeah, and then it gained meaning for me in ways I did not expect. Because, you get a call sign that late in your career. Most people don't know you that way. When I stepped into a world where I was leading, eventually 500 volunteers in mental health, wellness, suicide prevention. And we had generals, we had airmen, we had spouses, we had retirees. And in a really interesting way, the call sign kind of neutralized all of the status and rank and hesitation that might come along with trying to engage people authentically in a space like that. And the call sign became a symbol of trust. Because when you step into a room and you're trying to take away rank and you're trying to take away the pieces of someone's identity that might shut someone else down, that's the call sign carried through into that work and became very special to me. When I speak on tougher topics or just engaging teams, it reminds me why I do what I do and the kind of trust you can build when you strip all of those labels away and just bring the best version of you into a room, especially on some of those tougher topics.
You mentioning the call signs and how that kind of levels the playing field. I was deployed in Africa with the Strike Eagles, and I was deployed with Stubby. He was the commander of the F-15 unit there that was with us. And we were on a call with General Lofgren, and I forgot, I had been calling him Stubby for so long that I forgot his real name.
Yeah.
So we're in this meeting with a 2-star general, and I think Stubby's a lieutenant colonel at the time, and I'm a major. And I said, well, sir, like Stubby was saying earlier, and then we went along in the conversation. And then after the brief, he pulled me aside and he's like, you can't use my call sign when we're talking to a general officer. And I was like, wait a second. Here we are talking about all these times you can call my call sign and, we're equals here. Yeah. And then the time that I actually do it in a meeting, I get slapped.
I can't tell you the number of times. I mean, my husband is in that Strike Eagle community as an operator. He'll start talking about somebody or say, hey, can you reach out to somebody? And I go, like, do you know the name? First, last, give me anything. And there's nothing. And it's, we don't exist in the world, in those formal circles without our name and identity. But in the world of call signs, sometimes that's really your identity. Yeah. And it shapes who people see you as and how they know you. And the rest kind of fades away sometimes.
Seems like also that call sign that they gave you was a passage, like you said, of trust. It's like, okay, she's part of the team now. Because I'm curious, being a woman who is a maintenance squadron commander, can you talk us through what it was like to be a woman in what seems kind of like a man's world?
I mean, it is. I will say, I know the moment that I realized I was not, I was maybe an outsider, at least if you look at demographic numbers, but not an outsider in the way I viewed it. I came up and into the military and I was attracted to aircraft maintenance, I think because I was a bit of a tomboy. I enjoyed getting my hands dirty. I was always very mechanical. And I fought for aircraft maintenance. It was my first choice. And I can't tell you why I was drawn to it. But I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. And back in the days, which you probably remember, many people raise their eyebrows at this now, you had to wait in line at a tent for your once a week 15-minute phone call. And you had to choose who you were going to call, and you had to know how you were going to connect to them. And, wall mounted phones, no cell phones. You had to hope they were home. And I was probably a month or so in, and I went, man, if I don't call my grandma with one of these calls, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble here, because she was worried about her granddaughter going off to Afghanistan for reasonable reasons, I thought. And one of the first things she asked me when I finally got her on the phone was, are there at least other women there for you to connect with and to support you? And I brushed it off at first. I'm like, Grandma, it's fine. Like, I've got great people. I'm with a great team. Like, I just brushed it off. And I was working the night shift, so I didn't go to work till 4 p.m. And I went out and I walked the flight line, and I didn't see any. And we had 350 people on our team. And I went in with my chief, and I'm sitting down. I'm like, I'm going to pull up our roster. And in that group of about 350 people, there were 3, and I was the only leader. The others were much younger. And that was a moment for me where I realized, maybe it hadn't been something I had come up against or felt, like I walked in the room and I was different, because I had leaders that didn't treat me that way and really lifted me up and showed me that I was the leader in early days of my career. That until my grandma asked me that question sitting in a phone tent in Afghanistan, I didn't think about it. But moving forward through the years, it wasn't really until I became a mom and had kids. And quite honestly, I saw some of those stigmas and the difference in expectation levied more on my husband than on me, because we were both active duty. And in those days when, a kid's sick and we're taking turns and we're tag teaming this whole parenting thing, he got more judgment for stepping into his role as a dad than I did for stepping into my role as a mom. Because for some reason, being a woman, it was, okay, I guess I just got to deal with that. And for him, he didn't always get the same response. And so it's been an interesting little social experiment for us. It wasn't until I transitioned out of the military that I saw it through some different lights as well. But yeah, thanks to my grandma on that question, it was something I became aware of and really was mindful of throughout my career.
When you say they gave him a hard time, do you mean he had to take the kids to a dentist appointment or something, and they say something like,
just make your wife do it.
Just
have your wife do it. Why can't your wife do that? You'd be like, well, she did it the last 5 times. And, it would be,
and she has a full-time job too.
Well, it turns out, and there's times where we're in the Pentagon, it would be like, well, well, you have to do this today. He's like, well, she's going to be in the room with the Secretary of the Air Force with this. Turns out like her job is meaningful too. And I'm so grateful to him for always kind of standing up to that. But yeah, he faced, I think, more stigmas in being a parent as an active parent than I did, as we were both active duty. So you couldn't, and he was maybe in an environment sometimes where they weren't used to a dual military spouse. And they just go, why are you even asking me this? Just have your wife do it. And I think a lot of people serving alongside us learned a lot from and through us because we both always were equally kind of carrying the weight of that. But there were other challenges being a woman and, trying to have kids and dealing with, we struggled to have kids over the years and some of the stigmas that come along with, became aware of some stigmas and things that came up when I finally had my son that were, you must have planned this. To get out of deployment, to get out of this assignment. Yeah. What they didn't know is that we've been trying to have kids for 10 years and we had stopped trying and we had moved onto a boat. As you know, we didn't plan to move onto a boat in National Harbor, go to the Pentagon, these crazy jobs and have kids. And that's just what was meant for us. But behind the scenes, people were sharing stories, which I was made aware of, that maybe we planned it that way to get out of XYZ. And you go, man, that's, it is what it is, but there are stigmas there about starting a family and what that means for your career and continuing to work. And there were cases where other spouses in a more senior role were surprised and had some judgment that they shared with me that I was going to stay in after I had kids. So it's not always, I think, through the lenses you expect, but we definitely encountered some of those stigmas in different ways, I think, because of our dual mil service as well.
You said, the military is going through a transformation right now. And not to put you in a political situation where I'm going to get you to step on a landmine, what is the administration or what is this transformation doing right now? What are the positives and what are the negatives? Messaging wise, what are they missing versus what are they actually trying to do?
I think my mindset has shifted significantly, especially in those arenas of caring for service members, families, veterans, because I was in the institution kind of at the center of a lot of people really trying hard to make a difference. And I think turmoil and changes that come so fast that you can't think about the impact. Or do you have feedback loops to see how that decision or that change is going to impact the people you're trying to serve or that need to be able to serve you for your mission to be successful? The speed and maybe lack of follow through and feedback loop, those consequences won't be seen for years, maybe decades, and we will see them. I think where I've shifted my mindset, because that's an easy thing to just get angry about and stare at and go, these institutions need to do better to serve and care for our people, and maybe realize that those people, these missions are only successful on the backs of those people and those families. My expectation has shifted to how can our communities and those people who are maybe not bound by those institutional bureaucracies serve those service members, families, and veterans, and shifting my focus into arenas where people have the willpower to see those things through and understand how it's impacting those people they, serve alongside with in the communities. And that's the full demographic of service members, veterans, families. But I think shifting expectation, because those institutions have different focus areas right now. And instead of beating my head against those parts that'll just make you angry when you see the change happening so fast and how it is impacting real people that, you see the faces when you think of any of those examples, shifting to those places where people want to make a difference and actually follow through and stay the long game is the only way we're going to get through this without some of the really negative impacts I think we're walking towards right now with the turmoil people are facing.
One of my concerns with what's going on right now is, we're focusing so much on women in the military. Yeah. We've gone down this whole path of transgender, LGBTQ, you name the acronym, and we're so focused on that, but we're not really talking about how we are disenfranchising our civil servants to go through the ranks. So right now, with us attacking these academic institutions, these young kids are not going to be inspired to even go into political science or government related type jobs, because you could just be fired at a moment's notice when you've already dedicated, those first 4 years of your life going to college and then trying to get into these jobs in the Pentagon, they make it sound like it's just a bunch of, driftwood and, bumps on a log in the Pentagon. These young kids, they work their asses off. I mean, they're going and getting their master's degrees from prestigious institutions and their PhDs just so they can get a job at the Pentagon, and then to be laid off because you're in that first 3 years of, I forget the term they use, but you can be furloughed because you're in the first 3 years of your position. I think, wow, why would I spend all that money to go get a degree in political science because I was colorblind or I couldn't meet the physical fitness standards to be in the military, but I wanted to find a way to serve. So I'm concerned about the civilian piece of it, not just the way we're treating our military, particularly our women in the military.
Oh yeah, I mean, whether you're talking about military or civil service, both feel like an ugly, unpredictable arena to step into, whether you're talking politically or just life turmoil. And one of the things people don't think about when it comes to our civil servants, I did a lot of work in areas of suicide prevention. We had focus groups for many demographics. One of the most at-risk demographics was our civil service population. Whether you're talking, I worked in maintenance, and so we have depots and places where overhaul of aircraft and equipment is happening mostly by a civilian population. So add that to your typical Pentagon staff work that people think about. And they were experiencing suicide and ideation and struggle in life at rates that weren't being captured because we don't look at that data in the same way we do for our service members. And it was a tougher beast to support them because they didn't have the same unit support or culture to rally around them. And we didn't have the same policies, quite honestly. There were barriers to the policy and process. I knew leaders wearing a uniform that led those civil servants doing just amazing things to try to support them and figure out how to maybe shift that trend in a better way. And I saw policies coming out that were preventing them from doing some of that work. And yeah, does it make you, want to send your kids to go step into those arenas? Maybe not right in this moment, but those people doing that work, I have hope, or I hope to see changes that make that feel maybe not exactly how it used to, but some better version of that, where people are in the arena serving together in and out of uniform, and where that service is equally meaningful if you're wearing a suit versus a uniform. Because some of the civilians supporting the DoD that I've worked with, they're some of the most incredible people. They're showing up on weekends. They're pulling these all-nighters alongside you, doing crazy work that is very necessary, deploying in some cases. I deployed with a lot of contractors and civil servants as well. And I don't think their service is getting the credit it's due, for sure.
In your answer, you've mentioned suicide twice now. And I know about your postpartum depression. Can you share with us the struggle? You're an active duty military senior leader officer. You battled for 10 years to have children. Now you've had children. You're balancing that work life with a young newborn at home, and you're struggling with postpartum depression. Can you share that with us? Yeah,
I mean, I bring up suicide probably more comes looser off the tongue than most people, because it's something that's been a dominant theme in my career long before my own experience. I recently was in a program where we went to Arlington Cemetery this last week, and we're just talking about the people we lost. And for me, some of those first faces I see are the people I lost to suicide. Was recently able to talk about the first airman I lost, who I got to know him and his family more intimately after his death. His name was Isaac Guest. He was a dorm airman back over 20 years ago now, probably, at Tinker Air Force Base. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what that struggle could feel like and how many different lenses people experience that struggle and the assumptions people make about it. I originally framed my own experience after I had my son Logan as postpartum stuff. And yes, I experienced severe postpartum depression, anxiety, and there are chemical elements and things that you go through that amplify that. But I didn't realize until years later, really recognize the suicidal ideation and thoughts that I had experienced as well throughout that year. And it took someone really challenging me on that. Yeah, I just had postpartum stuff. Such an easy excuse. Made it easy to talk about, because it was like, this thing happens after a baby and people go, oh yeah, that's hard. What I experienced was compounding probably from when I was a kid and how I approached life and carried all these burdens and walked out into the world as a leader with a mask, wearing all this armor to do it all myself. And I had a fellow, I was on a panel with a military spouse who was also a veteran herself. And she challenged me a bit and used a computer analogy. And she's like, she knew me well enough and had been someone that had helped me see what had happened in my own journey. And she's like, how many years have you been spending popping open tabs that you never close out? Like, it's all these tabs open on your computer. Eventually the computer crashes. And I crash a lot of computers because they don't like maintainers touching the digital electronics as well. So it was meaningful that way. But I went, man, I went through a lot when I was younger. I entered into service and had traumatic physical injury twice within my first 10 years. And I've suffered pain and, kind of trying to overcome this injury. I had suffered these, suicides within my units. We face so many things over the course of our lives, and we think we get past them and that I'm past it. So it's good. Everything's fine. And that's not the way trauma works. That's not the way life works. I think the big realization for me was re-engineering how I approach when a tough thing happens and you stand up tall, get through the thing, which we're all really good at in military service. You get more serious and more stoic and let's just solve the problem and get through it. But there's a point where you have to take a look at what happened and make sure that you've learned what you need to learn from it, or that you've processed that trauma, whatever that means for you, instead of just moving on, packing it away and pretending, life goes on and I'm better because of it. For me, it was, the compounding effects. And those last 10 tabs, probably 20 tabs, happened to be having a baby, and all of the difficulties that come with that. But those were hardly the only tabs open on my computer in my case. So I think when I shared my story, the most meaningful thing that happened to me, I shared it going, there might be one or two people, as it was an article that I'd written that went out, that this helps them. And the stories I got back and the number of messages I received, when I speak, I share the story of turning my phone back on. And within 24 hours, I had hundreds of messages. Within a month, I had thousands. And it wasn't from other moms who dealt with postpartum. Most of them were from leaders who had been struggling through their journey of leadership and had experienced what I experienced through very different lenses, but the common threads and perspective of just feeling like they had to do it alone and like they couldn't be a leader if they stepped out and got support for themselves. That was very eye-opening for me because really that was my story. And I was chalking it up to this postpartum stuff that was easier to talk about, which was a huge piece of it, but it definitely wasn't the cause if you were to treat it as this one sole cause of what I went through.
So that's one thing I was going to ask is are you referring to Run Toward the Fire? Is that your story?
Yeah, that was the title of I wrote that originally actually just to, so I had agreed to be a part of a mental health awareness month thing. I had talked to a chaplain that I was close with in command to try to prepare for this because I realized I agreed to do the thing, but I didn't really know how to talk about it or what was going to be useful. And through that journey of this chaplain, who was also a social worker, who I realized in command was showing up on my couch once a week for an hour, probably because I was getting therapy and didn't know it. It was like unbeknownst to me, here you are being my support system. And I started writing, because I think better when I write, to help Travis and I understand it. And he was deployed, and I was writing back and forth to him to try to make sense of it all. And for us to kind of see this through a lens that we could move forward, because it was a lot on him as well as me. And in the end of it, shared it with someone and they went, you need to share this. And I never wrote it expecting to share it with anyone but my husband. And scariest day of my life when that thing went public. My phone was off for a solid 8 hours. I was sitting in a tattoo chair avoiding the responses that I assumed would be judgment, backlash, who knows what. It was a very different picture when I finally turned that phone back on. Yeah.
The tattoos, which tattoo is the significant one during this experience?
Yeah, so I found, like I said, tattoos are symbolic for me. I never had any you could see in uniform throughout my service. This one was the first one. It's here kind of under the jacket, but it's a set of boot prints on this side going into the fire. And it comes out the other side, kind of on an uphill path on purpose as the Phoenix coming out of the fire. And I purposefully made sure those boot prints were where I could see them in the sleeve, in the short sleeve uniform. Because for me, it was that reminder that I knew this was going to be hard, and I knew there would be judgment, and I knew there would be people that went, you're in command, still continuing to serve. And And you're talking about this at levels that aren't okay. And there are people that do believe that. And I had to remind myself that I had to leave those boot prints for others. And I had to do it before I turned that phone on and saw all those messages, because I wasn't sure what I was going to see. And I knew I needed something to just remind me that even if it was one or two people, that it was still worth it. Yeah.
It's almost like transparency is a virtue and a curse. There's certain people in your leadership chain that just don't understand why you would share these stories, these personal events with your fellow airmen. And I struggled with the same thing when I was in command. Yeah. I shared some very personal stories, and my leadership was very upset with me. But I knew that it was the right thing. For instance, I was in a medical line to get my flu shot or something like that a couple weeks later. And a woman, perfect stranger I've never met in our unit, just came up and hugged me, saying, "Thank you so much for sharing those stories." Yeah. Why is it that some of our senior leaders don't see that we're in a cultural shift where that invincibility, that armor is not always the answer? Yeah.
I think I was very lucky that in the period of time, and really the 3 or 4 years after I shared my story, we had an interesting alignment of leaders where I think more of them got it and got the value of that than didn't. And the responses from leaders through my chain and some of those supportive individuals that really encouraged us to grow through the struggle and learn how to do this differently because they had seen the impact of that. I also had at one point, generic about the room, was sitting in a room and a general officer shared that they believed that as long as we, faced everyone who was struggling with suicide and told our airmen that our Air Force deserved better, that would get them to not lead themselves to take their own lives. And I was sitting in that room having already shared my story, and this person didn't know that, talked to several people after the fact who had had their own experiences. And it was, a statement like that in my darkest place would lead me closer down that rabbit hole. It's not going to pull me out of it because I believed the world was going to be better off without me. Here's a way to reinforce that belief. And what I truly believe in those cases, these are well-intentioned people that want to do better. They want to shake people up by the shoulders. They have some of the same assumption I did, where you go, someone made a choice to do this thing and I don't understand it, but I don't want them to do it. We don't normalize the tougher parts of the conversation. We don't talk about the nuance and the many different lenses through which people lose hope. Like suicide's a disease of hopelessness. And people lose hope for many different reasons. And it doesn't always feel or look the way you expect it to. And I talked to so many people who went, man, sober me would never have had those thoughts. But when substances become a thing, and for our military, there's an epidemic of alcoholism that's been, there, and a normalizing of drinking to cope with things that's been there for a very, very long time. And I'm not a sober person who doesn't drink, but I even realized on a bad day, that's, I've said multiple times, if I had felt substances were an option that year after my son, I don't think I would be here. Because I was so severely anxious to an unhealthy level about keeping him safe. I wouldn't touch a drop of alcohol or any substance because I was feeding him and keeping him safe. If I can see where that slippery slope goes. And it's not as simple as this person got weak and they made a choice, And I think allowing our leaders to share their own experiences with each other. I know some very brave leaders that did that on stages or in public forums that started to shift those stigmas. And many of them are still serving and doing meaningful work. I think the second you try to shut that down and say that any sort of struggle is weakness and that we shouldn't show it or acknowledge it, and if you show it, you're not worthy of service, that's a very dangerous start to a very slippery slope. And
this brings me to your new job at the Bush Center. You retired about almost 2 years ago to the day, right? You retired in November. Yep. I was fortunate enough to be there for your retirement ceremony. My goodness, what a wonderful way to go out, in front of the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. Weather be damned, right? It was a great experience.
You were the man behind the lens capturing it for all of us.
And I was so honored to be behind the lens because I saw the emotion and how many people, how many lives that you impacted. And so now you have this 20 years of service in this culture, in this support, and now you got to take that off and start that new chapter. Yeah. How did taking that uniform off and then now leading you into your new role at the Bush Center.
Well, that's not technically a job. It's a program alongside the other work I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Walk us through that path when you had to take the uniform off.
So everybody sees what they see on social media and they feel like just these beautiful success stories, right? Even in the mental health arena, I have people say, we only want success stories to show people. And it's like, life is messy and the path to success and to fulfillment is messy. And coming out of uniform, we were in DC. We didn't know we were going to move. We found out we were going to move across the country, which changed my path because staying in DC leads you towards things that are, dominant here in DC that would feel like success, whether or not they would have been a path to my purpose and where I was meant to be in life. I'm not sure that's true anymore. And so for me, it was these shifts that life shoved me in directions that we would have resisted. We would have never chosen for me to retire, us to move across the country, make all these changes all at once, this beautiful baby stepping plan. And life says, no, you're going to rip off all the Band-Aids at once. And then we're going to figure this out. And I was very blessed. My first step back into work, I was about to step out on my own. I wasn't finding what I wanted to find in some of the companies I was talking to in some of those more traditional routes. And the first thing I was connected to was my work with Victory Strategies. And I was speaking. I was doing work in a leadership arena, and they brought me in for that type of work. And, it is not a full-time job. It's whatever I choose for it to be, but I'm able to be a speaker and a coach, which can be very isolating work with a team of people. And so for me, that was a very beautiful thing. We learn from each other. It's an incredible team of people. And I can continue that meaningful work and not feel like I'm alone in that work. It's also a type of work that really fills me up and gave me what I needed to step back into the veteran arena and the tougher arena. When I stepped out of uniform, I had to take a step away from that work. And I did a lot of underground research and seeking to understand what was going on out of uniform. But truly, there are some toxic elements to working inside a bureaucracy and seeing when that follow through doesn't happen the way it maybe should have or could have. And some of the things I stepped away from, I needed a breather to see if I felt like I could find the right step back into that work. And that is the Bush Institute is a program where none of us work for the Bush Institute. They bring people in through their veteran leadership program from the widest range you could possibly imagine of people trying to make impact in the veteran space. And it's facilitated by Todd Connor, who founded Bunker Labs, incredible human, who just brings us together and shows us how to collaborate and team with each other and step into that space in a way that feels different. It's just beautifully collaborative. The Bush Institute is all about bringing different perspectives together and showing us how to engage each other in spaces that might feel like there should be conflict or friction, and how do we overcome that instead of avoiding those tougher spaces, which if there's anything we need in the world right now, it's learning how to step into a space when we disagree with each other and find ways to do it differently. And that has been their mission. And it's taken me reflectively to spaces I didn't expect. It was, okay, this is going to help me facilitate my impact in the veteran space. It's also shown me how leaders can come together in ways that I had maybe lost a bit of hope and faith of, and create impact and deal with tough things together and overcome their differences to make a really big difference. And so, both of those things will always be things that are a part of it's somebody call it a portfolio, stepping out. They're like, you don't have to do just a normal job. People don't do that anymore. You can have your portfolio of things. And so for me, both of those spaces are important. To touch on your earlier question about being a woman stepping out of uniform, the piece that I think was most, disruptive or just disorienting for me were the number of people that challenged me in maybe more of a negative way to ask why I would even consider working. You don't have to anymore. Just, you're done with that. Now, why wouldn't you just step into life? Just be a mom, just do this, just support your family. And I honor those people that is their journey. That's not me. I am the best version of me when I'm working and engaging and challenging myself through projects, through work, and, being a parent. And stepping out of uniform allowed me to, coach my kids' little league 3 years in a row and be there for things and make choices for when I'm gone. But I'm one of those people that will probably work till my end of life. Mm-hmm. And I was in a workshop, the number of people that challenged challenged where my head was at, or wondered if maybe I was just doing it because I felt like I had to, made me feel like something was wrong with me for stepping back into a life of purpose. And I had a few people, also veterans, share that they went through that same journey, that they were conflicted between doing absolutely, nothing in a work sense and then stepping back into meaningful work. And also read some books and did some research on those blue zone countries where people live their longest. And some of them don't even have a concept of retirement, which helped me normalize, how I felt, and that I felt a pull towards finding my place. But that was going to look different for me than it was for other people. And it might not be a traditional work career path. But that I'll always be stepping into those arenas and figuring out where I'm meant to be in a work sense and being there for my family, and I didn't have to choose one or the other.
The two of us are very similar in that capacity. Yeah. When I retired, everybody said, take 3 months off, take a breather, go do some things. Oof. And I did match up some of those vacation bucket list items immediately after retirement, but it's just not in my nature to sit still.
Yeah.
But then I ask myself sometimes, is it because I'm running from something? Am I afraid to acknowledge something? I have dark things from my past. I've done things in the military that I still struggle with to this day. I know everything I did was lawful, legal, and but I still struggle with those things. So are we running away from those problems, or do we just truly have that engine that never turns off?
Yeah, I mean, both and yes. I mean, I know for me, it's a journey and it's work to figure those things out, right? And to retool how your mindset and how you approach those things. And I am one of those people who, if I don't let my engine turn off, that is not a healthy place. And recognizing what was this persistent engine running just because I felt like I had to, and I didn't know how to stop or didn't want to sit with the silence when I did. Because truly, I think for many of us in military, we keep running because we don't want to sit with that quiet moment and see what comes up. It took me, going into therapy and programs that help me understand, as a veteran, what does it look like to grow through your trauma versus to, see it as a medical condition that just needs treated. And wonderful nonprofit organizations. I recently did one where they teach you how to fly fish, but they also teach you how to connect and build those pillars in your life. And I'm like, here I am with this new skill, but also maybe really assessing and looking at what I'm doing in life. And it's not all just mental health. I have a leadership coach. I am doing those things for myself. And sometimes it takes trying something and having the awareness that now you go, okay, is this me doing this because I feel like I have to? For me, I had to step away from some things. And there were things I stepped away from that I thought were my purpose in life that a few months later, year later, I didn't want anything to do with stepping back towards them. And there were things that I felt a pull towards, that being away from it was tougher than being in it, even though it was a tough arena. And that's the veteran space for me. Being away from it was an unhealthier place than being in it and figuring out how to take those steps back into that arena. And I think everybody's experience is different. It's almost like you're re-engineering your calculus. And I went through one program. I encourage many veterans towards Commit Foundation. It's like a transition program. And they did this exercise where it's like, the typical bubble with all the spokes coming off of it. They're like, you military veterans, and they're all veterans themselves, but they're, like, we're past this. You put the military in the middle and you feel like your whole life is off of this thing that you can't control. And you build everything off of that. And it's like all integrated into this life. Well, when you transition, that realization that it doesn't have to be that way takes people decades sometimes. What does it look like if you put yourself in the middle? And then in their case, that program did a lot for me to make me realize, here are the things that are non-negotiable in my life. If I actually let myself think about my ideal day and my ideal experience, now, once I know those things and have done the reflection, read the books, done the exercises to be aware of that, my calculus has shifted. So when something's put in front of me that might pay a lot of money, but doesn't tick some of those boxes, I feel different about it. And I tell people, even the why I joined the Air Force, I always felt drawn to it. That feels like some fluffy gut instinct. I'm a hyper analytical person. I overanalyze everything. But when you feed yourself and analyze some of those thought processes and habit patterns, that calculus and that gut instinct lead you somewhere else. And so you have to do the work. This isn't just something where you choose to do the things you love. I didn't know what I wanted to do because it was right for me and what I wanted to do because of expectation. And that took me probably a year. And I think it's probably just a forever journey to figure out. As long as you're thinking about it, I think you keep leading yourself in different directions. And then you realize in this world out of uniform, your choices can change as your calculus changes. And doing what feels right for you in that moment and moving through and being somebody that lives a life of service and fulfillment, whether you're wearing a uniform or not. And that's what it's all about. And you can't compare your journey to other people's or chase their expectations. I think that's the biggest piece of it. It's hard to do.
The Commit Foundation, my goodness, I loved it. It was life-changing. It was life-saving. I wouldn't have been doing these interviews or following my photography passion if it wasn't for the Commit Foundation. I mean, I don't make money from this. I lose money. No. I need sponsors. You know, I'm not nonprofit, but I'm not for profit. Yeah. So everything I do goes right back towards the veteran space. And it's because the veterans, the military saved my life. It gave me the purpose that I needed.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And, you know, earlier you were talking about social media and suicide and some of the things that we're going through right now with our youth. As I was preparing for retirement, I started talking to the chaplain at the Pentagon. And I grew up in a faith-based family, but I kind of vectored away from that. And then as I started talking to the pastor again, and he told me about this place called Reclaim, and Reclaim Ministries is out of Colorado and Ohio. So I flew out to Colorado this summer, and you're totally disconnected. I mean, we're like 10,000 feet up in the mountains, no cell service. You know, you literally put all those devices away and you're just I was there with about probably 40 men. And it was all about not so much preaching, but it was more about the community and being part of a team where you can share those vulnerabilities. You can be there for one another. Hey, they asked, one of their questions was, okay, you get a flat tire and you're on the freeway. What do you do? Well, you fix the flat tire, right? But what if you couldn't fix a flat tire? Who would you call? And I'm thinking to myself, I would call AAA. They're like, you don't have a friend that you would call? And it hit home to me that men in particular are so independent and have this mantra that they got to be tough and got to do everything themselves. That at Reclaim, they really broke those things down and started to remind me that faith is an important thing and not clicks and likes on social media. So are our kids not, I mean, where are they missing that community piece? Because I'm not trying to be preachy and say you got to go to church, but that community, right? The military was that community for me. And so when I stepped out of uniform, I started to realize that faith had to be part of my journey going forward.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts?
I think the community piece is something we almost take for granted while we're in, because it's so built into everything we do, whether it's at work or at home, or it's a beautiful thing that you don't realize how impactful it was until you step away from it, in a sense, I think. And I actually had a chaplain. I think the beautiful thing about military chaplains is it's not about religion or anything else. Their definition of faith is just beautiful, because it's life and it's seeing something bigger than yourself. And on my last day in uniform, I had coffee with the Air Force chaplain, and he encouraged me, as you look back on this life of service and military journey, it's really easy either to dwell on the harder parts or to look forward, dwelling on the what you're losing. And he shared with me his intent, because he was about to retire as well, to take every day to just remember a story and to write a story and to allow yourself to reflect on those stories from service, starting from the beginning. And I did that for that chunk of time where people say, just take 3 or 4 months off. I did that. I don't want to say it was the healthiest portion of it was necessary. But hanging on to and looking at those stories and how they created a community in so many different layers, because I stepped out of uniform and suddenly there was a part of me that felt like I was that, whatever you are, you're 18, 22-year-old person that stepped into uniform, and I was, waiting tables at your local Sizzler Steakhouse. I was working in the Home Depot. I was, barely making it through college. And a part of me, that insecurity kind of pops back in, because you go, who am I? And looking back on those stories, I learned how to be a leader. I led thousands of people and was given responsibility, but was guided on how to hold on to that responsibility. And those thousands of people, I'm still connected to them. The world is a pretty beautiful place these days. I get little check-ins and messages. When I mentioned earlier, there's people who handed me those, one of them was an actual sticky note, but shared those stories with me after I shared my experience. We're all checking in on each other. That's a feedback loop that doesn't stop. And I found myself in a community that just wrapped me in their arms in so many instances. I talked about our journey having kids. I had one of my toughest miscarriages. Travis was deployed and not here. And his community and leadership wrapped him up and took care of him. Mine took care of me in ways that I'm trying to stiff arm. I'm fine. Everything's great. It's, pretend I'm not here. Don't look over here because I'm used to struggling on my own. And I think you feel like you lose that, but we also know how to build it. And it's also still there. And you wherever you find it, it's a necessary part of our DNA once you've lived that way and had that kind of community. But being there and reaching out to those folks who feel like they lost it and don't have a place for it, whether it's, wherever they find it, it's a very lonely moment transitioning out of uniform, even if you're surrounded by people. And those of us who are lucky to have that community or find it or maintain it, pulling those other people into it and finding ways to get them connected with things that are meaningful for them, because that's one of those toughest pivot points for military members. But if you're somebody at the beginning of that journey, there is no more beautiful place to find that community, again, in just all aspects of your life and know what that could feel like so you can build it on the outside than a life of military service. Take every tough element of it that makes you tougher. The connection to people over the years, it's priceless. It makes us who we are. It's pretty special when you do take the time. I encourage anybody, just one little story a day. When I was unpacking my house and pulling up all these little things, taking the time to reflect on those stories instead of just dwell on the tougher bits, it'll shift your mindset.
Well, Ange, as we get to wrap up here, I try to get our youth to understand we're in a society now where everybody just wants to be comfortable. Like you talked about getting ready for retirement. There's cultures where you said nobody retires. You just work until the end of life. Now we're in this world where we're always seeking comfort, pleasure, luxury items. Yeah. And I have come to the realization that the struggles in getting out of our comfort zones, the military is continuously challenging you. Great. You made a promotion. Now we have more responsibilities for you. We notice you're weak in this, so we're going to go send you to that assignment to get you stronger in those skill sets. Constant, endless challenges, right? So as we wrap up here, what do you recommend, or what are you trying to do to help our youth understand the importance of service? Yeah, you bring up 2 points, and I think it's youth and it's everybody. It's that importance of service, and it's that importance of continually understanding and feeling and testing the boundaries of your own comfort zone in life, whatever life you live. And there's extensive research out there that getting stuck inside your comfort zone, it's the place where all growth and goodness kind of dies, and you lose that spark. And you're not living life to its fullest. And that means different things to different people. Military service is an incredible thing because it's going to put you in challenging places. And the second you get comfortable, we're going to shake something up where the world is. And you're going to just naturally have those opportunities. And I think finding them in whatever part of your life allows you to grow and test your boundaries and make you feel like you're growing as a person. For me, physical fitness was always a part of who I was. I didn't quite realize it was my coping mechanism, whether I was going for a run. When I hurt my back and I suddenly couldn't, that was a really hard turning point for me. And over the years, figuring out how to build back in that physical challenge and pushing my comfort zone. I may never run a marathon again, but I can do a Spartan race where I get to take breaks, shake it off, and, modify my activities through a lot of physical therapy, and pushing myself beyond my comfort zone in that. To me is symbolic for all of the things we do in work. And the more comfortable I've been in life, the more dissatisfied I've been, and the more stuck you feel, at least for me. And it doesn't have to look like, I think the picture for that, especially in the US, is like this burnout culture where you just run really hard at something and people are pushing and you just never stop.
That's not always challenging yourself. That's just keeping those gears grinding to a point of extreme. And it's a recipe for burnout. How do you do it in a way that you know how to push yourself really hard and recover, and then step back in and learn from it and try again or do something different? I think our definition of that isn't always healthy. There's so many amazing books and things out there showing us how to do it differently, and also to take care of ourselves and be mindful of the recovery that's required when you are pushing yourself outside those comfort zones and taking the time to learn from the times you fail outside your comfort zone and step back and figure out what steps you're going to take next. That's life, wherever you find it. And a career of service, again, it taught me what that felt like and how to find it in those different arenas in life, but also how to keep yourself at the center of it and your values at the center of it. And that looks different for everybody. And only you can say if you're outside of that or not, and continuing to strive to live life to its fullest. It's a beautiful life. And if we only get one of them, might as well be pushing yourself to experience it in whatever ways life draws you.
Thank you, Ange.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing to collaborate, because I know you're doing great things with the Bush Institute and with Victory Strategies. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks.